Hey everybody, Bacon here, and instead of doing deck pick of the week, we're going to be doing a special episode on the upcoming card changes / nerfs in Hearthstone. So if you haven't been paying attention to what's going on, there's going to be a change coming up to the cards Small Time Buccaneer and Spirit Claws. So the change is going to be that Small Time Buccaneer is it's having its health reduced from 2 to 1, staying at 1 cost with the text the same. The only difference is the 1 health instead of 2. And Spirit Claws is going from 1 mana to 2. Now, even though these are only single number changes on very powerful cards, these changes are going to do a lot to mix up the metagame. So before we get into the meta-analysis, there are some assumptions we're going to make. The first assumption we're making is that these cards are not going to see play after being nerfed. That might not exactly be true, but a common theme among cards that are nerfed in Hearthstone is that they quickly become unplayable. They go from overpowered to fair, and fair in Hearthstone means that you'll see it in Arena. You might see it in low levels of Constructed. You might see it in experimental decks. But for something to be a top tier card and a top tier deck, it needs to be more than fair. It needs to be very powerful. And the way Hearthstone works is you can only make binary changes, right? 2 health to 1, 1 mana to 2. You can't be like, Spirit Claws now cost 1.5 mana, or like 1.3 mana. And that would probably be a more reasonable change. But you can't do that. Even with things like Molten Giant, could have been a reasonably playable card if they nerfed it from 20 to 23 mana instead of 20 to 25. But they stuck with the sort of like round numbers that look nice. The other thing is making changes to cards is because of that binary nature we were talking about, it's much harder to get a good balance on a low mana card than a high mana card. For example, the Call of the Wild nerf, going from 8 mana to 9 mana, it's still a big deal. It still made the card, pretty much unplayable due to curve considerations. But in terms of value for the card cost, that's still very fair. 9 mana for Call of the Wild is still fine. It just doesn't work for hunters. Many other classes would play that. But the difference between 9 mana and 8 mana is much smaller than the difference between 2 mana and 1 mana. Spirit Claws, I can't imagine, are going to be very good at 2 mana. That's why we're making this assumption that it's not going to be played. With the Small Time Buccaneer, going down to 1 health is actually a really big deal. It more than doubles the amount of things that will kill it. There are so many ways to deal 1 damage in the game that having 1 health is a really big liability. That's why it's really why a lot of the most powerful 1-drops in the game have the 1/3 stat line rather than like a 3/1 stat line, right? You don't really see many 2/1s played either, because that 1 health breakpoint is really vulnerable. It's the same reason why Magma Rager is one of the worst cards in the game. So if we take a quick look at these changes, what do we see that is the most affected? We see that aggro decks are going to take a big hit. Pirate Warrior, Aggro Shaman, both very reliant on Small Time Buccaneer, and in particular, Aggro Shaman, very, very reliant on the Spirit Claws. It's one of the best cards in the deck. Extremely strong, especially when comboed with the Small Time Buccaneer. So that's those are the 2 decks that are going to get hit the hardest. And what doesn't lose anything? The Reno decks, right? Reno decks are one of the answers to these aggressive strategies. So they won't be losing anything directly, but with less Pirate Warrior Aggro Shaman in the meta, there's less of a reason to be running anti-aggro deck lists, right? Now, that's not saying that control is going to stop existing, but they might have more freedom to be running non-control shells. Like in Reno, Warlock will likely see a return to Mountain Giant strategies rather than Mountain Giant and Emperor Thaurissan, rather than the anti-aggro deck lists that were including things like Frost Elemental, Corruption, stuff like that. That's one thing we might see changing. Another thing I would like to mention is that with less aggro decks in the game, it's going to be a big resurgence in the Miracle Rogue. Now, the aggro Pirate Rogue is almost certainly going to die with the loss of Small Time Buccaneer, but Miracle Rogue has a lot to gain with a slower meta. Now, Miracle Rogue has always improved when the meta slows down, but this could be a really good opportunity for them if another top-tier aggro deck doesn't pop up. And you might be saying right now, Bacon, Miracle Rogue runs the Pirate package. It's got double Small Time Buccaneer. Oftentimes it's going to be running Swashbucklers. It, of course, has patches in there. And yes, that's true. But I don't think it's going to be really any hit at all to the Miracle Rogue deck list, removing those pirates. The thing with Miracle Rogue is it didn't run the pirates because it wanted to. The pirates don't play into the Miracle Rogue strategy, with the small exception of patches because it thins your deck and makes you more likely to draw into your combo pieces. But Miracle Rogue, it ran the pirates because it had to, less so because it wanted to. The pirates gave it more outs against aggro than just building like a 6/6 Van Cleef on one. Having the pirates help you contest the early game, but if there aren't any top tier aggro decks to compete with, then Miracle Rogue can cut the pirates and put in things that are better against the slow decks. So I'm talking more cycle. We're putting double sap back in. Some lists we're going down to one. We might even cut Fan of Knives, things like that. So there are lots of cool things you can do with Rogue if you're worrying less about the aggro matchups. So I've got some theory crafting here on things that I suspect will be good in the future of Hearthstone going into the nerfs. So first thing we're going to look at is the rogue deck list. Like I said, we're cutting the pirate package because we just don't think it's going to be good post nerf. Cutting the pirate package, but that gives us an opportunity to fit in things that we might not be able to put in before. Like a good option might be Shadow Strike. For dealing with Reno decks, we might want to put in a Beneath the Grounds if they become very popular. We might not have to run Fan of Knives. Things like that. Even Jade Rogue might become a thing if its strategy is built to prey on these slower decks. Jade Rogue is a deck that is good at that with things like the Unearthed Raptor brand synergies, Shadow Steps, things like that. But it wasn't, it was very susceptible to aggro strategy. So if there's less aggro in the game, then strategies like that obviously go up in value. We might see more Shaku, things like that. So Rogue has a lot of places it can go when you're opening up these extra spots in their deck, and these type of changes can make them better against the Reno decks. Like for example, the current Miracle Rogue does have a losing matchup against Reno Mage, but you can tech it with the removal of the pirates, where I imagine it will become a favorable matchup again. Reno Mage had a lot of good ways of dealing with those pirates, but if you are teching in something like Beneath the Grounds, you're removing the Small Time Buccaneers, things like that, and just putting in more cycle, more combo potential, then you can almost certainly turn that into a favorable matchup. If we are under the assumption that Miracle Rogue is going to emerge as a top tier deck for dealing with the slower Control or Reno decks, then we have to consider how the meta will shape itself to deal with that. So traditionally the way you deal with a rogue is by going hard into the aggro direction. Now, the loss of the pirate package is a big deal for aggro. The loss of Spirit Claws is a big deal for Shaman. But with those things gone, it might become reasonable to expect that Hunter is going to make a return. Now, Hunter did get a few decent cards in the expansion, but they were kind of pushed out of the meta by other better aggressive strategies. So you had Pirate Warrior, you had Aggro Shaman, and they were really good at doing what Hunter traditionally did, which was going face. Now, I'm not sure if this is going to be the best version of a face Hunter, but this is something that I can imagine being good if your strategy is to beat up on rogues. So aggressive hunters might be able to push rogue away from dominating the meta, but we're really not sure of how that might play out. Another way you might want to build this is actually going for the Finja package. So Finja with the war leaders and the bluegills. Saw someone on Twitter today referring to it as a 5-mana Call of the Wild, and sometimes it really can be that. Like it's a huge amount of value in this 5-mana body, and a lot of the time, you can't really stop it from getting that value because of the stealth, things like that. So if we're going for an aggressive hunter strategy, we're either going to go for like the more traditional trap hunter with the cloaked huntress, the secret package, stuff like that, or we might go for something with Finja. So we would maybe take out the secret package and put in Finja, 2 war leaders, 2 bluegills, something like that. I'm not really sure what the best build of hunter will be, but if you're looking for a new aggro deck to punish the rogues on the ladder, then this could be the way to go. The other thing about aggro decks is just because we're losing Spirit Claws and Small Time Buccaneer does not mean that Shaman is going to instantly become bad, right? Shaman became a lot worse when, or Aggro Shaman became a lot worse when Rockbiter Weapon was initially nerfed, but that doesn't necessarily make it bad either, right? So this is something I was thinking for a potential Aggro Shaman deck. We're looking at a more traditional setup with the Doomhammer Rockbiter combo. We've got Leroy back in here, but we're still running a lot of the good Jade cards. Now, the Jade cards were surprisingly good in aggro because they just add a bit more board presence. And a lot of the Shaman Jade cards are just like borderline good cards, even without the addition of the Jade Golems. They're just like pretty solid cards in general. So, yeah, I think something like this might be the way that an aggro Shaman might look in the future. But once again, really, these are predictions. Can't really be sure of how it will play out. And the final Theorycraft prediction I have right here is a deck that's really not changing at all, but it could emerge as a big contender to punish the slower Reno decks. Now, this Tempo Mage is really, really strong at dealing with Reno Mage, Reno Warlock, Control Warrior, because we're running a very heavy top end. So we've got the Emperor Thorson, we've got Archmage and Ragnaros, as well as 2 Fireland Portals. And that is really, like, extremely punishing for these slower Reno decks and stuff like that. But it is sort of pushed out of ladder viability by the presence of Aggro Shaman. Still good against Pirate Warrior, but yeah, it's the Aggro Shaman that becomes a big problem. So this is something that could end up emerging as an answer to the slow decks that aren't losing anything through the nerfs, and conveniently, neither is this. So those are my thoughts on the upcoming nerfs. I think overall, there are going to be some good changes coming to the game, bringing some much needed diversity to the ladder. But I'm sure within a few weeks we'll find something new to complain about. So let me know what you think of these decks. Let me know what you think of the nerfs coming up. And yeah, if you like the video, please subscribe for more content. We'll see you guys next time.